The next project we're going to do is a hardwire wrap pendant, and we're going to wrap this stone, it's a piece of dichroic glass, using hardwire and what's known in wire wrapping circles as a border wrap. Here's another one that we've done, and the one we are going to do today is similar to this, although I'm going to put a rabbit ear bail on it. In a future project, I'll demonstrate how to make this wrap bail. This is a very flexible design. As you can see, this is a cabochon. This is a biwa pearl, and it's just a slight variation on the same design. And this is a faceted stone. Again, the same process. Here I've added a little filigree work, but it's a little different and a little more precise. So we'll address this as a separate project later in the tapes. When we're going to wrap a stone, the first thing we need to do is determine how much wire we're going to need to do that wrap. So what I do is I've got a rough design in mind, again, something like this. And as you can see, I've wrapped a continuous wrap across the bottom. Then I have a bezel, wires coming up the side, wires on the back to hold the stone in place. And then I bring it together at the top, and then we have a bail. So I start by using what I teasingly call a magic wire with my students. And the purpose of the magic wire is to form a very rough design. So I lay it down around my stone, and I mark where I'm going to wrap. This is just for rough reference. I'm going to wrap the wire from here over to about here on the. I can mark the stone and the wire. I marked it in two places here. Then I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to leave about a quarter of an inch of clearance at the top. It's just the way I like to do the design. You can bring it right together, although it's a little more problematic to get it. And then I'll mark this wire where it crosses. And then I'm going to add 2 inches to each side for the bail. So I'll add 2 inches here and 2 inches here. Okay. Now I can take this wire and straighten it, and it gives me reference marks. The total length of the wire is the distance between the 2 outer marks. In this case, it's right at 8 inches. I can also measure this dimension between the 2 close wires at the bottom, and that's going to be the distance that I wrap across the bottom of the stone. So that when I start wrapping the flat bundle, I'll know that I have to measure to wrap that distance, which is almost 7/8 of an inch. It's in the ballpark, and we'll refine it as we're doing the wrapping. So the second thing I need to know is how many wires am I going to need that are 8 inches long. To do that, I take pieces of scrap wire, and I'll have to make some scrap here, and I'll cut 4 or 5 pieces. And with the stone laying on its flat side, I'll stack these 4 wires up and compare them. And that's about right. What I want to do is bring the wraps up to on the stone so that it will go over the curvature of the stone. If I have a real flat side, I might have to go another wire. and I bring it up to where I want it to be, and I subtract one stone because I want the wires when I set the stone to create a tension on the top of the stone to hold it in place. You'll see that a little later. I know that for a stone this size and this shape with this kind of edge, I need 4 wires. But and you'll get a feel for how many you need as you do your projects. So now I know I need 4 wires, 8 inches long, or for a total of 32 inches. So I'll cut my wire, and for this I use a tape measure. So I've got just a little more than 32 inches there. Okay. Now I can put the tape away. I cut my first wire using progressive cutting techniques, as I mentioned earlier, and I cut it about 8 inches long. Again, and emphasizing the progressive cutting, I move that wire up from the same end I cut it on, and I move it right along the coil of wire. These don't have to be exact, they just need to be within 1/4 of an inch or so. And again, by using the progressive cutting techniques, when I line them up and look at them in the light and move them in the light, they appear to be very consistent across the wire bundle, the bundle of primary wires. Again, let me mention that the primary wires are the main structural wires of the project, as opposed to the wrap wires, which hold the primary wires together. And again, using painter's tape, I tape them about 1/4 to 1/2 inch from one end, and I tape them flat. Tape the wires flat, just like that. I'm just straightening them a little bit. Okay. Next, I cut my wrap wires, and for this project, I'm not quite sure how long the wire the wrap wire that I'm going to use that goes from here to here is. So I'll cut about 15 or so inches. It's not so critical that this line up like the primary wires do. And I'll start my wraps. As always, I grasp the wire, the half round wrap wire with the flat side toward me, and you can double check that by moving this wire in the light. As you move it, you'll get a reflection, a flat reflection. If you have the round side out and you move it, you don't get that reflection. If you want to double check, look at it under high magnification. You can tell which is the flat and which is the round side. So So I'll start this. If you would prefer a better reference, you could mark the center of the length of this wire. And again, I wrap the first one with my hand and squeeze it flat. And I'll start and put just 2 or 3 wraps on this. I'm doing the same thing I do on all wraps, and that is, as I wrap, I offset the wrap to my left or right, as the case may be, but normally to the left. And as I squeeze it down, it overlaps the previous wrap wire, and when I squeeze it, it'll fall right into place. It gives you very nice, tight wraps. You'll observe that for the wrapping, I'm holding the bundle of wires, that is the primary wires with the wrap wire with the flat nose pliers, not completely across the primary wires. Because if I go too far with the pliers, then I'll wrap around the end of the pliers, and I don't want that. So I just go part way across, maybe 2/3 of the way across the flat primary wire bundle. And as I push that over, I offset it slightly to my left as I'm looking at it and squeeze it. That gives you very tight wraps. At this point, it would be good to check to be sure this is somewhere near the center. And I'm pretty close. If you need to adjust it, you can again grasp the wires on either side of the wrap wires and just move your pliers side to side and adjust it slightly. Okay. I actually want this offset a little bit because I need to compensate for this length. It would be more critical on a larger stone. So I'll just continue my wraps, and I know from using my magic wire that I need to wrap that distance on the magic wire. And again, we decided it was a little under about 3/4 of an inch. All right, now when I get it wrapped to the approximate length that I initially measured, I can begin to look at it with respect to my stone. And in this case, I can see that I'm not quite there. I need just a couple more wraps. I think we're pretty close. So now then, I'm going to do a trial fit directly on the stone. And to do that, I want to straighten these wires just a little bit more. Keep them as straight as you can. I'm going to shape this curvature to the shape of the bottom of the stone. Now here I'm going to use some specialized pliers. These are called ring bending pliers. You can use round nose pliers or what I call combination pliers. They're half, one jaw is round and the other jaw is flat. And what we're going to do is we'll take this, just showing you an example, and we'll just begin to shape it. Till it very, very closely, and if you need a large curvature, you take bigger bites and move back a little bit or if you need a small curvature, you work closer to the end and make a tighter bend like that. In this case, we're working with a larger stone, so you can get very exact with this. And this is what we want. We want something that fits about like that between the two marks I made on the stone. I hope you can see those marks. I'll bring them up a little bit higher. So when I get where I need to be, I'll take my flush cutters and cut it. Now this is almost an exact fit and length of what I want. So then I'll straighten this wire, take the curvature out of it. This becomes a pattern wire. I'll then measure that against my wrap wire, and I'm just a little short. I still need a couple more wraps, so we'll finish it off here. Wow. That's close enough. So I'm going to cut these this wire off, and I leave just a little. If I need to make another wrap on either end, well, I will. But if you recall, we started this wrap with 15 inches of wrap wire, and we've used most of it. We've got about 4 or 5 inches left there, but you cut it long. You can always go back and you'll use these pieces later, the extra wire, but you don't want to cut it too short because you want to complete your wraps. Okay, now with my round nose or my ring bending pliers, I'm going to shape this so that I get a good tight fit on the stone. It's just a gentle curve. I'm just nibbling away. As I get to this end, as you can see, the curvature increases. So I'm going to tweak this straight. And that's a pretty good fit. By that I mean, when I lay the stone in there, it very closely follows the contour of the bottom of the stone. There's not much of a light gap there. And the wires are where the wrap length is what I want, so I'll back this off now and cut the wires, the wrap wires, roughly a third of the way across the primary wrap bundle. And mash those flat. Okay. Now that I've got the curvature I want, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to bring these primary wires, shape them around the stone. We may have to come back and refine this a little later. I'm just using my fingers to get a good fit around the stone. I use an assortment of pliers to get that done. Sorry. And as that's about the kind of fit I want at this point. As you can see, it's pretty close down here. Now that I'm going to bring each of the 4 primary wires up together, and as I bring them in, recall that I want this dimension in here to be a quarter. I want them to cross a 1/4 of an inch above the wire, so above the stone. So I'll just squeeze them together, and I can do one of two things here. These are pretty stiff wires because they're big wires. I can mark that point on both wires, or alternatively I could just cross them where I want to go there. I'll do it both ways. And straighten one side, and then I would bring the other side to where I bent the first side, the first primary wires, just bring them together. And this is fairly critical. And then bend that one back. Okay. As you can see, they come together at the same point, and that's what I want. And I'll just trial fit this. I know that this won't fit in it because the wires are so large and they have so much spring. If I force them, why they'll come apart. But that's what I want. I've got about a little more than a 1/4 of an inch up here. When I put the stone in, it's going to fit like that. So that's exactly what I want there. And I'm straightening these wires out. All right. Now then, I can take the extra wrap wire I had left, and I'm going to make a sacrificial wire. In other words, I'm going to put this around both of these wires at once. And this wire is temporary just to get everything aligned. And when I get it suitably aligned and get the bail formed and start the final wrap wire, then I will cut this wire off. But so when I've bent this wire, I've moved it up my flat nose pliers so I get a wider width here, roughly equal to the width of these two, each of the two primary wires together. And then I hook that across the wires like that. And again, make sure they're aligned both front to back and alongside each other. I'll put just a couple of loops around it. Mesh it with my flat nose. And if you can see, as you look at it from the side view, there's 4 wires on each side you don't see. In other words, they're perfectly aligned. If you see more than 4 wires, they're not. So you have to manipulate this to get the 4 wires lined up side by side and front to back. I guess this would be front to back. This would be side by side. So when I get that in place, I'll go ahead and I'll put like 3 or 4 wrap wires because I want it to maintain that alignment. Again, this is going to be a temporary wire, a temporary wrap, and we'll be cutting it off later. So this is what we have. And you can see the stone has got it's got a little spring tension on it now, so we'll have to and that's what we want. We want a good tight fit. When we put it in, we'll take advantage of that spring tension. Okay, we can go ahead and take our tape off. And the reason you only use the last 1/4 of an inch or so, I mean just of the primary wire to tape it, you can just pull it right off. If you tape it down in here and you try to take it off frequently, you'll bend the wires. Okay, I want all these lined up. At this point, we've already determined which is the front of our stone, and that is determined because we've made the wrap wire fit the base of the stone, the bottom of the stone. So this is the front of the pendant. Now what we're going to do is we're going to begin to form the bail. And I'm going to pull each of the wires out on the back, each of the back 2 primary wires out, and separate them from the rest of these wires. These 2 wires are going to be used to form the bail. So what I do is I use some round objects. I can use my pen vise, this little 1/4 inch end of the pen vise. I can use my round nose pliers near the back of the pliers where it's the largest. I could even use a wooden dowel if I had one, but I don't. So what we do is begin to roll this down to form the bail. And I manipulate these wires to the height I want. So when I look at it from the front, you know, I'm trying to get an idea of how high the finished bail is going to stick up beyond not only the top of the stone, but beyond my wraps that I'm going to put on in a few minutes. So I want these a little bit shorter, so I just undo it and I grab it a little bit further down on the wire. Since this is a large stone, I'd say something about like that. So that's where we are right now. I cut this off to get it out of the way. Okay. Now with the flat nose pliers, I'm going to offset this to the back like that. And the purpose of this is that I'm going to use that, and I'll cut this off. I'll cut these two wires even. I'm going to use these two wires as kind of a handle to push this like this, and that will help me wrap it. I'm going to move the temporary sacrificial wire on that I put in before to hold everything in alignment, and just going to slide it up and get it out of the way. By sliding it up, it still holds everything together. It's clear of where I'm going to put the permanent wrap for the bail. So now I'll take another piece of wrap wire, roughly 3 inches long, 3.5. Again, this is going to have to go around this width, so as I did before, I'll move it back further on the flat nose pliers so I get a wider width across here. And I push these two wires in, the bail wires, and I make my first wrap by hand, and I wrap it just like any other wrap. When I get a couple of wraps on it, I can go ahead and cut the sacrificial wrap off, and the easiest way to get it off is just to cut, very carefully cut. You don't want to cut any of the primary wires, but just very carefully cut the temporary sacrificial binding wire off. Any way you can. Okay, that's what we have now. Then we'll continue wrapping up the bail. Observe that we started right here where the two wires come together, and we're wrapping up toward the bail. Okay, I've got a little bit of a hump down here, so I'm just going to back this off, and I can correct that by pushing out on the piece of jewelry and pulling with my flat nose pliers and just wrapping it down. So there we are. One comment I'd like to make at this time is that I could have twisted these two wires, and when I'm using a smaller, for instance, a 22 gauge wire, they're not as strong as this 21 or 20 gauge wire, and I do twist them because it it work hardens the wire and makes them a little stronger, but it's optional. Okay, so that's what we have, and now I will just come in and I'm going to grab the tail of these the ends of these two bail wires, and just bend them back up like that. And I'll cut these about, I cut them just under where they're going to meet the bail, the bottom of the bail. And just bring them in. By doing that, I lock both the bottom and the top bail wire, or bail wrap wire in place, and it will never ever come apart. So now I can cut that one right there, and I can cut the bottom one right where it comes. So there we are. Okay, now then, it's time to go ahead and put the stone in. And we know it's going to be a tight fit because these are heavy wires and it fits tightly. So I might just bring each side out a little bit. Till it goes in fairly easily, and I think we're there. That's exactly what we want. I don't know if you can see or not, but it's a fairly tight fit. There's not much light around the perimeter of the stone, and it's going to be just right, actually. I do need to adjust it a little bit down here if there is a bit of light through there, but we can do that a little later. Okay, this now is the back of the piece, back where the bails are. The first thing we're going to do when we set the stone is prepare a flat surface for the stone to rest against. To do that, we take the back two wires and we separate them. And again, we're using a very thin-bladed pocket knife in this case, but an inexpensive paring knife that you buy at a grocery store is equally satisfactory. And I raise these, and so I have them separated just slightly. All right, I've separated the two wires. Now I'm going to make those wires flat so that the stone, again, the flat side of the back of the stone will have a place to rest. And so I take each of the two sides and observe that I'm using a little wider pair of flat nose now. And I turn those in like that. I'll do the other one the same way. Since this stone is not truly symmetrical, they're not necessarily going to be the same back here, but make them as symmetrical as you can. Something like that. All right, now then, tell you what, before I do this, I'm going to adjust this curvature just slightly. All right, now then I just press this in this case force it in, because the wires fit so tight around the sides. And there we are. So we've got a pretty good fit down here. I need to adjust it just a little, and I can do that by taking I'm going to pull this out and work on it just a little more. I think this is going to be a better fit. Okay, there we are. Just one more adjustment. What I'm doing is just making this a little rounder and eliminating the trying to eliminate the light at the bottom of the stone. It's not too bad. All right, now what we do, we've got the stone held in place. We separate the front wire. And just like we did on the back, bend it up. Don't cut. And again with the flat nose pliers, we just move the pliers right down to the wraps. Begin to bring it in. by using the right width of flat nose pliers and coming right to the wraps, we get a very equal bend here on the and since the stone is not symmetrical, the bends aren't going to be entirely symmetrical, but you should try to make them look pretty much the same. Okay, now the stone's in place and very secure. The remaining project now is to separate these two wires, these two side wires, 3 side wires on each. And sometimes this is not quite as easy as you would think it would be. And our bale's a little uneven, so all we have to do to straighten it is just to put the flat nose pliers in. So all I'm going to do on this particular piece is I'm just going to bring these wires down each side. And I'm going to cut them off. And I'm going to cut what I desire to do is just bring them to the bottom of the wraps like I have on this one. Just right to the bottom of these wraps. Initially I'm going to cut them long. And because I don't, I can't judge at this point how far down they're going to have to be. And I'll bring them down as a group as I get closer and closer to the wraps. I can begin to see how much I'm going to have to cut those. Bring them in right to the sides of the piece. Look at one. Bring the ones on the other side down. And I want to make them the same length, so I'll cut these the same length as that. Just to be sure I don't overcut it, I might leave them just slightly long so I can adjust it as I get them in if I'm actually, they're pretty close. Okay, that's fairly good. Now I'll even these up. And we're essentially done. I'll spread these two bale wires and that's our pendant. Very plain but nice, I think. So now you would want to deburr and polish this, and again we use the same process with the rubberized abrasive followed by the polishing compound. That's our pendant.